how perceptions of explainability, transparency, and fairness actually shape the acceptance, use, either initial or continued use of AI-based applications. Measures of explainability, we're thinking in terms of explainability of what data was used to train the algorithm, as well as how the output will be used in the process of managing the employee. So explainability across these two dimensions. With regards to transparency, to make it clear to the user, to the prospective user, if we're looking at what drives initial use, how we are taking stock, essentially, of their actions, to be transparent in how their interactions with the systems will be traced. And with regards to fairness in information systems in particular, we have three dimensions of fairness: procedural, which has been associated with the most important fairness issue for users, so probably it's something we should keep in mind. How the decision is made, right? So that's the procedural fairness. The distributive fairness is the balance of inputs versus outputs. Yourself as a user, what does it cost you to put in? What do you get out of it? Obviously, if you get less than what you're putting in terms of data, time, effort, maybe you perceive it as not very distributive fair. Reciprocal fairness is the balance of personal and shared benefits, right? So what do I get versus what the collective gets? We're thinking that explainability and transparency will somehow enter into a sort of fit relationship. So you could have their independent variables. So essentially you could have both high, both low, or variations of the two. This impacting trust in the system, and then the trust shaping either acceptance, initial use, continued use. The more explainability, the higher this thing gets, the higher the transparency gets, the cognitive load may be impacted because you're exposing people to feedback. So that could play a role as well. We're thinking in terms of a few moderators: task uncertainty and task potential impact. So probably you're not going to need as much explainability for simple tasks. If the task is complex, you're probably going to need more. If the task costs you $5, you probably don't care much about the explainability. If the task costs $10,000, maybe you do care. So there you have it in a nutshell. A couple of extra additions, maybe Anna can talk.
What is the context?
What is the context? We're thinking either people purchasing plane tickets, purchasing staff in organizations, buying supplies for business. So interacting with the system to get recommendations.
It's a recommendation system.
Kind of like that, yeah.
We need something that will generate habituation, right? Whatever we take, right? We need something that is...
And we need a task that people will be able to relate to and be able to answer questions, right? So
this is initial usage, like the first time you experience the system.
Initial use, continued use, right? Because if we're interested in impacts, it has to be continued use.
I'm thinking that these variables at time t1 will not. Yeah, okay. Because
at time t1,
like if you trust the system,
at time
maybe you don't
T1
need these things anymore. That's what I mean. You see what I mean? Like, don't explain it to me. I trust it.
It will still change over time. Yeah?
It could be.
If you have a bad experience, then you go back to explain me why you're making.
I mean, that's why we have habits here.
You want to test it for health?
I'm not sure in terms of health, it could be. I'm not sure about the direct. I think in some earlier models we had habits as a moderator here, because habits, the more habitual you are, the less the impact of this explainability becomes. I'm not sure why this ended up as direct.
At the end of the, let's take the example of like Google Map, where at some point you're being proposed like an alternative route. Well, don't make me think, right? I don't need exactly to know why the other route is faster. Just like click OK, right? So we need something at some point that gets to the point that you trust it enough that it's don't make me think, right? Yeah. Okay. Anna, you want to add something, I believe, right?
So Pierre Mayoric challenged me to
I'm
draw,
always-
to draw a model that would take into consideration the level of analysis and the time effect, because in this model everything is at the individual level, so it doesn't match the experimental setting. And so some of the parts of the model will not have enough power to test, plus they are questionnaire based, so it doesn't match the experimental setting. We won't have variance. So since time effects and cross-level effects cannot be put in a model, like it's impossible, we need to think about the experimental setting and the variables at each level. So we have the individual level, in which elements stay the same for each individual. Okay, so those will be the manipulations of I don't know, whatever we want to put, explainability, transparency, fairness, uncertainty, that will not vary. However, to be able to test the time effects, habituation, and to resolve the issue of initial use and continued use that we cannot measure at the individual level, we need to take into account the variables that will play a role at each trial. So the experience level will be what varies within each individual, and because it includes, in this case, time, it will have an effect across all individuals, even if it varies within. So therefore, these are the kind of the possible variables that we could look at to have enough power to test certain things. So for example, cognitive processes will vary, like attention, cognitive load, engagement. Emotional states will vary. People will be more aroused at the beginning than at the end. And we could also capture the acceptance behavior that will take care of the issue of initial use and continued use in the name of whether you are using the recommendation or not. And the idea is that the relations will be weakened by time across individuals. So, and that's why you cannot, because there is time and cross-level effects, you cannot actually put this in a model. You have to kind of explain it like this and include the time effects and the cross-level effects in the hypothesis.
And I have a question about acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah,
Is it in the model, like compliance with the recommendation?
Yeah, the problem is that acceptance at the individual level, here, this, which is here, if we have 30 individuals and we ask them if in the future they will use this, we won't have power. This will not hold.
But is there a difference? Sorry, is there a difference between acceptance of the system and acceptance of its recommendation at time one? These are two different things.
Yeah, exactly. So I think to have enough power in the experimental setting, the acceptance should be about the recommendation, not about the system, because if we just measure everything here, there will not be enough variation or enough people to. We need to make sure that we take into consideration the strength of having the multiple trials, and therefore I think it's better to look at the acceptance of the recommendation, because it's also able to capture the actual behavior, not intentions or something in the future.
Okay.
But we need to think through the group, and this was a challenge posed by me, by Pierre Mayoric.